hope lives always. Many people are familiar with the story of Exodus. And maybe that's because you've seen that Charlton Heston movie. Maybe it's because when you were a child or you have grandchildren that saw that movie, The Prince of Egypt. But many of us, whether we've gone to church or not, are aware of Moses and the burning bush and separating the sea and freeing the people from slavery in Egypt to bring them to the promised land. But what most people don't realize is how that story begins. I want to read a scripture for you. This is from Exodus chapter 2, and these are verses 23 through 25. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and knew. What we don't often realize is that what begins the story of this people's liberation from slavery, of their journey into freedom, is their own cries to God for help, their own desperate pleas that enough is enough. It's a reminder to me that there is hope when we voice our grief, when we voice our pain. There is hope there. Hope that those words will not fall on deaf ears. That they don't. In this section of Scripture, we see 4 verbs that I want you to look at. This is God's response to hearing that pain given a voice. God heard. God remembered. God looked. And God knew. God heard their groaning. He remembered the promise that he made to their ancestors to keep them safe and to give them this land. And God looked and saw what was happening to them. And God knew. My favorite part about this is that the original translation of this, the Hebrew, we don't get any sense of what God knew. More recent translations try to point it towards something, but if we read the way it was originally written, it says that God heard, God remembered, God looked, and God knew. I like to think that the answer to what God knew is not just one thing. That God knew their pain. That God knew what God was going to do about that. That God knew the hope that existed in that pain. That God knew what was going to happen after that and after that. That God's knowledge extends beyond anything we try to apply it to. I find hope not only in the fact that their cries are heard. I find hope not only in the fact that in those cries of justice, in those cries of enough is enough, is the hope that someone's listening. But I also find hope in the reality that what God knows is beyond anything that we can put our finger on, which makes it bigger and everlasting. Like hope. Because hope lives.